Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gabester here. This is the quick raid guide for heroic Garrosh Hellscream. And as always, if you want the full guide with a lot more detail or any role-specific guides, you can click on the annotations at the bottom there. So I think the best way to do this for the quick guide is just to go through each phase and go over the basic mechanics and strategies that you're using there. So the first thing to focus on is positioning. You'll want to pull the boss to where we have the blue marker. That's basically at the opening of that horseshoe. And then have everyone stack up on the boss position there. The first Desecrate weapon will land right on top of the raid as the first set of ads are coming out. So you want to AE those down quickly and just heal through the Desecrate damage. Meanwhile, one or two people should run off to deal with the Engineer. So if you're facing outward from the throne, you want to kill the Engineer on the left or to the west of the room. If you have a player capable of single target damage that can burst the Engineer down by themselves, then that's great, send that person. Otherwise, two people is fine. We use a healer and a DPS for the first one, and then 2 DPS for the second one, because we need extra healing during that second Engineer. Once you kill that and the first explosion occurs, you can use a minor cooldown for that. Then you want to position Desecrate. Desecrate team throughout the fight needs to be 3 people, so I would suggest 2 healers and a ranged DPS for that. So we move up to the throne for that first Desecrate, as you see there it landed, and then back stacked up on the raid, while the second Engineer is being dealt with by 2 players. For the ads that come out second on this first phase, the second set of Warbringers, you'll want to be wary of their fixate mechanic. I won't go into the full details of it here. Again, you can check out the full raid guide section if you want. But the basic idea is one mob can fixate on one player at a time, and it's generally based on the distance the closest player is fixated. However, you can't be fixated by multiple Warbringers, so tanks can only have one fixate at a time. With that said, for the second set, once the boss shouts and the mobs get a lot stronger, you have to be careful of the damage output. So use personal cooldowns if you have one of these second set of Warbringers on you attacking your face, and that will mitigate a lot of the damage. Otherwise, get them as low as you can, around 50% or below, and then use knockbacks to shoot them into the passing Iron Star ball as it comes past. And if your DPS is up to snuff, you should push the boss before you get a third set of Warbringers. That's the basic goal. Now, one important note is that on Heroic, the intermission phases are always in the same order. So you always get Temple of Jade Serpent, as you see here, very first, and Terrace of the Endless Springs second. You should not see the third intermission at all. So this first intermission is really the, I would say overall, the most difficult aspect of the fight, and probably the section that you'll need the most practice on before you get everything down. So I'll try to briefly cover all the mechanics, but again, you can check the full guide section for all the details. So the basic idea is, just like normal, you have sets of embodied doubt spawns. There are 15 in total, each in groups of 3. So 2 in the front, 1 in the middle, 2 in the back by the boss. For 10-man raid, the best thing we found is to split up into pairs. So each pair of 2 players deals with each set of 3 ads. And you want to split up based on both the DPS capabilities of the pair of players, as well as their ability to interrupt or stun because of the cast of the embodied doubts. So on Heroic, the basic idea is to prevent all casts of embodied doubt from the ads of your group. If you can do so, if everyone can do so rather, there'll be no damage during this phase until you break the boss out of his bubble thing, and things should be pretty easy. That said, your group can survive a couple casts going off, but you generally don't want it. So the best way to deal with this phase is, once you come up with your pairs, figure out among your pair of players the basic rotation of abilities that you can use to prevent casts of embodied doubt from occurring. So again, it's based on the raid makeup, how you split up, but for example, as a healer monk, I have quite a few interrupts. I have an AE interrupt with leg sweep, that's a stun. I also have a single target interrupt. So I'm generally grouped with someone that either has just a single target interrupt, like our rogue, or someone that only has one group area of effect interrupt. And these are kind of the rough splits that you want to make throughout the raid. From there, the basic idea is to come up with a plan, even down to the global or ability usage that you can use every time. As soon as you engage your group of Embodied Doubts, about 3 seconds later, they will start to cast Embodied Doubt, all 3 of them. So that's when you need to start looking to interrupt. So the way that our group does it, our pair, is I am the first to engage, so I know after 3 globals, which are 1 second apart for me as a monk, then they will start casting, and then I can stun all 3 of them. So I use 3 attacks, then I stun everything, then the first one of the pair of the trio is usually dead by then, and then me and my partner each single target interrupt the next cast. Me on the left one and the other person on the right one, and by then both of them are usually dead. So that is the order that we use without fail every single time, and it always works. So again, each of your pairs of players needs to figure out a method that will allow them to do this. As in terms of splitting, we generally have the strongest, so 2 DPS groups in the front, so they can kill theirs quickly. And then we have the weakest DPS, which is one of our tanks, and another healer in the middle, so that the front DPS players, once they're done with their sets, can help the middle group. And around that time, the back 2 groups that had further to travel, but have about average or middle DPS, are done. The last thing is to soak up the orbs, the Consumed Faith orbs. The important thing to know is you don't have to be inside the orb when it goes off to get the buff. You just have to be standing right next to it in melee range. So the best thing is to communicate where the orbs are. They'll always be randomly in the back 3 groups, and then stand right next to an orb so that any players that are coming in late can trigger it by just touching it, and you'll get the buff even though you're just on the outside edge. And then other than that, just dodge the Annihilates. Your tanks can soak up the Annihilates with big cooldowns for a lot of vengeance if you want. But this, as I said, is the main difficulty of this fight, getting this phase down properly. Once you finish the first intermission, you'll want to immediately consider your positions for phase 2. And these are crucial to getting through this phase properly and giving yourself enough room to handle the mechanics. So we drop the first Desecrate, as you can see, kind of by that little part of the wall that sort of juts out along the side of the throne, between the throne and the door there. So your Desecrate team of 3, your healers and your ranged DPS need to move to that position. Meanwhile, the boss is pulled to where we have the yellow marker, which is kind of in that pseudo corner that's created by the ground effects, or by the graphic on the ground there. And this position is basically to keep him in attack and heal range for the Desecrate team throughout this phase. So you can see once we move out for the second Desecrate, we're still in range to heal and attack the boss, and drop the Desecrate out there along the wall. So basically this allows the boss to be completely stationary once he gets in position throughout the entire duration of this phase, so DPS is maximized, while also forcing the Desecrates to be along the outside edges so that you have more room in the center area for the last couple phases where you kind of need that space and need to maximize your damage. So I won't go again into the details, but you can see that the basic pattern here is that your Desecrate team moves out for Desecrate, comes back in to deal with the charms, as you normally would. Then you stay stacked up on the boss with the entire raid for the non-empowered Whirling Corruption. As long as the boss did not hit 25 or higher energy during the first intermission, he should have normal corruptions here. And therefore you can stack up on the boss like you see we're doing. You want to use probably 1 raid cooldown or personal cooldowns for each corruption while you're stacked up here, because it does do a fair bit of damage, but otherwise you just heal through it and maximize your damage. And that's pretty much it. This pattern just repeats over and over for a total of 4 Desecrates during this first part of phase 2. And then after the final 4th Desecrate, as you see here, you get 1 more Whirling Corruption, and then you'll enter the second intermission phase. So this part is all about getting the pattern down, properly using your cooldowns, and making sure your Desecrate team players in particular know when to move and when not to. So once you enter the second intermission, this is where the divergence in overall raid strategy can happen. So as you see, the footage here is very boring. I'll talk a bit about the strategy that we're using and why, in my opinion, it's by far the best strategy at this point to do in 10-man. Basically, the idea here is that you skip the second intermission. So while you will enter it, as you see here, you don't actually execute or engage it as normal. You just stand on the back of the wall. And as soon as you run in, you move to the back here. And as long as you stay in the back, you will not be targeted by any ground effects during this period. And then you just hang out here for the full minute, and then you're popped out just like normal. So I won't go to the full explanation, but you can check out the full guide for all of that. You can see the pros and cons on the screen there for doing this method. The basic idea is that it eliminates the learning requirement in actually executing this second intermission entirely. You don't need to do it. Also, by not doing this, Garrosh gains a bit more energy than he would normally because you'd engage him at some point and stop his energy gains in the second intermission. But it turns out the way the fight is designed, he doesn't actually gain very relevant empowered abilities by doing it this method. The only thing he really gains extra is empowered desecrate, but because, especially in 10-man, your strategy will not revolve around killing those weapons in Phase 2 and beyond, it doesn't matter whether they're empowered or not. They just can't die while they're empowered, but you're not going to kill them anyway. So, again, that's the basic logic behind it, and if you want more details, you can check out the other video, but this basically means that for the second intermission, you just hang out here. The goal is to have enough DPS during most of Phase 2 prior to this, so that the second half of Phase 2 after this intermission, you can push the boss into Phase 3 fast enough. So generally, you want to enter this second intermission with the boss around 20% health or so. A little below, a little above is fine, but that's basically the idea. So once you end the second intermission, you're in Phase 2.5, as I call it, the second part of Phase 2. So immediately when you drop down, you want your Desecrate team of 3 to move to the first Desecrate position, which you can see there we place right on the side of the throne. And then run back in quickly because you're going to get your first charms. You deal with these charms as normal, so make sure everyone bursts them down quickly. Call out interrupts in your voice chat as necessary. Once those are done, then this is the key part of this Phase 2.5 and Phase 3, is dealing with Empowered Whirl. So the way we found that worked best was to basically form a half circle, kind of distance indicated by the red and green markers respectively, that our players could be at max range from the boss, about 40 yards away in a half circle, spread apart. And when the whirl occurs, you can stay in that position, keep attacking the boss for the DPS required, but be far enough away that with quite a bit of healing or even some minor cooldowns, you can survive the damage from Empowered Whirl. If you get a minion of Yasarj puddle under you, you can just step away a few yards further from the boss while that puddle's exploding, and then once your ad spawns, pick it up and kill it off like you would normally. So here you can see we're doing it again. Everyone's moving away from the boss. In this case, some people are moving out of attack range because we don't need to attack the boss right now. And this just depends a bit on your DPS. And again, you can check out the full guide for more info. But the basic idea is we had to stop DPS on the boss at about 17% during this Phase 2.5, so that we would finish up the final set of minions following the second Empowered Whirl. Also deal with the mind controls following that, and then we're all stacked up on the boss here so that we can push him into Phase 3 before he does his third Empowered Whirl. So that's the basic goal in terms of DPS in Phase 2.5. You want to do enough DPS to push the boss to 10% before Empowered Whirl number 3 occurs. However, you don't want to push it too fast, so you may have to hold damage at some point. So again, we held at about 17% until we were done with that second set of ads and mind controls. So adjust accordingly, but that's the basic idea. And once you find the right time to transition him, as long as you've dealt with the ads properly and can heal through the Empowered Whirl, you'll enter Phase 3 and be down in the last half of the fight. So once the boss is at 10% in Phase 2.5, you'll transition him into Phase 3. I'll go through a little bit of animation there. So you need to make sure your Desecrate team is out and ready for Desecrate, which will occur right away after Phase 3 begins. So here you can see Desecrate team, we're toward our our red marker, which is the same side that we placed all the previous desecrates pretty much. The reason for that is that we want the green side, the west side of the room, to be open for our final empowered whirl, which will occur in this third phase. So we want enough space on the other side of the room to be able to deal with that. So again, the desecrate goes off, we come in, deal with charms, and then we all spread in our half circle positions for the final empowered whirl during phase 3. And otherwise, it's the exact same as when we did it on the red side, on the east side of the room. Make sure you're spread properly, you move out for your minion. But if your DPS is up to par, you will only have to deal with one empowered whirl during this phase 3 of the fight. So don't be afraid to use your personal cooldowns essentially while you're doing that. You can see we had a few people out of position, so things are not as smooth as they normally would be. But make sure you handle the charms, and then your desecrate team moves out again immediately for the next desecrate. Once that desecrate is done, you get back in, and you should push the boss to his transition into the final phase before that second whirling corruption occurs in phase 3. If you do happen to get that second whirling corruption, it's technically possible to still survive. There are a few ways to do it. One is to ignore the adds, not DPS them at all so that they don't buff one another very much, and stay spread out and just kind of hang in there until the boss transitions. Once you transition into the final phase, the adds won't be a bother anymore. They're gone, basically. That's difficult to do, though, so I recommend pushing the boss before then. If you don't even have enough DPS to just keep the adds active but not kill them, you have to go even longer, then you're going to have to kill the adds and do it so quickly because the charm after the second empowered whirl is really fast. So you'll probably have people that are charmed quite a bit out of position during that second round of charms. So watch for that anyway, if you happen to get a second empowered whirl. But like I said, with Bloodlust and everything in this phase 3, as long as you transition into it properly with nothing else going on, you should be able to burn him down and skip that second empowered during this phase 3. Alright, phase 4 begins around 2% health or so in phase 3. It's a little bit of variance there, but once he starts transitioning, you'll have a bit of downtime. So the first thing you want to do is when you have about 3 or 5 seconds left before the phase 4 teleport, as you see there, redot the boss, because the dots, even though you're frozen here at the start of phase 4, will keep ticking on the boss. Do a bit of extra damage, basically. Once you enter this final phase 4 area, this is the new part on Heroic that you don't see at all in normal, of course. So all the mechanics here are pretty new. However, in terms of how they work, you've basically seen mechanics that work this way in the past. You just have to adjust accordingly. If you've done Heroic Ragnaros, you'll be very familiar with a lot of this stuff here. So the basic idea is initially move the boss to the right, so on the right side as you see where he is here, when you enter the room. And you'll have 2 basic positions. You'll move him from this position, then to the other position, which is kind of in the back left of the room. You'll see that in a bit. And then just go back and forth. You also do not need a tank swap at all, so use your tank that's either best at mitigation and healing, in our case our paladin tank, or the one that's worst at kiting, basically, is another way to put it. Because your other tank will be in charge of kiting the Iron Star, which we'll talk about in a moment. Now, to deal with the main mechanic on this fight, which is Malice, you basically have to be stacked up behind the boss, so everyone except the tank, and any player is a target for Malice, potential target, except the tanks. Once that player is targeted, they get a purple circle around them, which you can see there, and anybody inside this circle will be valid targets for malicious blast bolts. And this occurs every couple seconds. 2 bolts will go off to the 2 nearest players, the 2 players closest to the Malice target player. Once those bolts go off, it does a bit of shadow damage, and you get a 4-second debuff that increases your malicious blast damage taken significantly. So the idea is pretty simple. People stand on the edges just inside the circle of Malice. Once they get a malicious blast application on them, they step out of the circle, so just move to the right or left a couple yards, and wait those couple seconds for the malicious blast to end, and then you step back in, and you repeat this process over and over. And that's the basic idea to handle Malice. So you'll see on the screen during Malice, I have right in the middle a very handy little weak aura that I made to help everyone with that. So I've included the link to that in the description. You can check out our wiki at the bottom there. Of that page is where that import text is. Anyway, so this will help everyone in your raid basically just keep track of handling the Malice. So if they get a malicious blast, it tells them to move out, shows you how long until it's gone, then you move back in, and then once you get another one, you move out, and so on. And that's all there is to handling Malice. The other main mechanic is bombardment, which you can see occurring there, and as it sounds, it just bombards the area with tons of firebombs. So, generally speaking, the way to deal with this is to, spread out and move across to the second position. So, the position that is opposite wherever you happen to be at the time. And this will force all the bombardment bombs to land in places that you don't really care about. And once the bombardment is over, you're in a new position and you're not at risk of standing in the fire left by the previous bombs. However, when bombardment is active, there's a clump check, as it's called, which basically determines if 4 or more players are within about 5 to 10 yards of one another, and if so, this will spawn an Iron Star. So using Iron Star is how you handle the Manifest Rage ability, which is the final mechanic here. So basically we'll walk through it here and I'll show you what's going on. So you deal with the first Malice as normal, then stack up again, get ready for the next Malice. And as the second Malice is ending here, bombardment will begin. So what you need is to have at least 4 players stacked up near one another, which should be fine if you're handling Malice properly. And as soon as that bombardment clump check triggers, which is 3 seconds after the bombardment starts, you need to spread out. And if everyone was stacked up when that clump check occurred the first time, you'll spawn 1 Iron Star. You can't really see it on the screen, it was there briefly, but you'll see it in a moment as it comes around on the left side. And this star basically chases the player that's nearest to the star at any time. So there you can see it on the left, it's chasing our monk tank. And basically this player kites it along the front wall and then around the back side and comes around the back side of the boss. So you can see the Iron Star coming in. And you need to time it so that it hits the boss, as it's about to do there. There it goes. Hits the boss just as he gains 100 energy. This will cause him to start casting Manifest Rage, and if he starts to channel Manifest Rage for a while, a ton of ads will spawn and kill you. So by hitting him with the bomb just as he reaches 100 energy, you'll interrupt that cast and prevent the ads from spawning. It's important to note that this explosion does do a significant amount of damage, so use your raid or personal cooldowns when that hits, just to make sure it doesn't kill anybody. But other than that, that's basically how the mechanic works. And then the final important thing to note is that once you interrupt him one time with the Iron Star, you don't need to spawn any more Iron Stars. So you need to spread out for any future bombardments. This is particularly important for the second bombardment that occurs right after that Iron Star hits. So make sure your entire raid, except for the Malice player, is spreading out just before the bombardment starts, the second one. And meanwhile, you have 2 assigned players stacked up with the Malice target for Malice number 4. So we used our 2 monks, our monk off tank and me as a monk healer, with the Malice target player. Unless I'm the Malice target, then we have a backup player to help soak it. The basic idea is those 3 people can stay stacked together to soak up the malicious blasts from Malice number 4 without spawning an extra Iron Star. And it prevents the boss from gaining a bunch of extra energy and doing a lot of damage. So, again, I sped through the explanation of all that. Check out the full raid guide for Phase 4 to see the entire thing in action and get all the details. But the basic idea is Malice number 4 requires 2 people to help soak the Malice the full time, while the rest of the raid is spread out moving to the other position. So you'll need massive personal cooldowns, which is why we use our monks for this. But anyone else with a big cooldown can do it as well. And that's pretty much it. The DPS requirement on this phase is very simple, very low generally speaking compared to the rest. And all you really need to do is kill Garrosh before Manifest Rage number 2 occurs, or at least before the ads that spawn from it kill you. And doing that is pretty simple, especially if you handled all the malice up to this point properly. Otherwise, just make sure you handle all the malices, save for number 4, as normal, and you spread out for each bombardment before it occurs, except for the very first one, so you spawn that first Iron Star only. And that's it. So I hope that helps. That's obviously the quick version of the Heroic Raid Guide for Garrosh Hellscream. Pretty difficult fight overall, and good into this tier and expansion. So hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.